Hello, we're here with Martin Schuerz of the Austrian National Bank. Thank you very much for being here with us at INET this year.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So, what is new economic thinking to you?
Well, new economic thinking for me personally means that it brings in topics that have been neglected by mainstream economics before, such as distributional issues.
So you've been working on distribution of wealth for a long time, and this is part of your work at the Austrian Central Bank, and this has been recently published. So what originated the desire to take research into this direction?
Yeah, I would say at the beginning it was by accident that central banks are normally not interested in distributional issues. These questions of income inequality and wealth inequality are too close to normative issues, whether a society...
Where we fear to tread.
Yes, exactly. But before the crisis, in a way, they found out at the ECB that it would be a good idea to see whether those borrowers in the private household sector that have high debts, whether they can bear these risks. So to look on the liabilities side, and in this sense, even before the crisis, they found out that microdata are getting more importance to know whether on the liability side there's on the other side assets to cover risks and to judge the vulnerability of the private household sector, and that it is not enough to look on the macro level, which has been the traditional focus in central banks.
So you've worked on this for a number of years, and your research has recently been published. We're going to link it to this interview. And what are the main conclusions from this research?
Yeah, the main conclusion of our research is a high degree of wealth concentration. Wealth inequality is a lot higher than income inequality in all countries. And the characteristics of wealth inequality are different from those of income inequality.
How so?
If you look at Branko Milanovic, haves and haves not, and he says in the US, for example, you have the median income, and with this median income, you would be at the top in India, China, where else. So if you are poor in one country, you would still be quite well in another country. With wealth inequality, the situation is different. In all countries, you have rich people and poor people, yeah? And they are rather similar from their level, absolute level. And this shows that the question of wealth concentration is one that is of a global side. You cannot say the rich live only in the US or only in China. They are in all countries to be found. And you have all kinds of problems if you want to do research on the basis of household service. Because first you sample a few thousand people, and you will have a problem if wealth is very concentrated, that you get in a random sample a wealthy guy. And if you have one in the sample, you will have really a hard time to convince him to spend his time on answering your questions. So the non-response rate is a lot higher for the wealthy. They do not participate. So your research has a, I would say, middle class bias.
Right.
We do not have the rich in, the true rich, and we do not have the poor in, those that are living
Really
in prisons, in hospitals, or on the street.
So how did you account for that in your research?
Well, what you do in statistical terms, you do if rich people do not answer questions concerning the amount of shares or bonds, you have the possibility to do multiple imputations. So for the missing variables, you can impute. But if you have no billionaire in your sample, you cannot impute for such a missing. What you can do is you come up with your results and you combine it with the Forbes list and with a Pareto estimation. But what then is missing is that you do not know anything about the age, the profession, whether he or she is married, how many children, what kind of education, all those things we know about them. So what is interesting is how do you get rich? And that's easier to answer with service than just with private wealth studies.
So you focused your research on the Eurozone.
We focus on the Eurozone, yeah.
And what are the main conclusions in distributional terms within the Eurozone as it is today?
It was a kind of surprise. The result was that Austria and Germany are the countries with the highest wealth inequality. And as you know, those are the countries with a well-functioning welfare state where you have public pensions and you have also health system where you do not have to pay. So this was very hard to explain, and a lot of misunderstanding took place. People compared the median net wealth of countries, and surprise, surprise, Germany was lagging behind Cyprus and other southern countries. Yeah. Now.
Well, that was just because they were looking at the median.
That was because they were looking at the median, and the median in Germany is one that is not a homeowner.
Right.
So they do not own their house because they have other possibilities. They can rent it, can rent a flat. So how to make these comparisons was difficult to understand, and up to now it is still an open research issue to explain these differences. And you cannot compare just the figures, not even the 90th percentile. Why not? Because in the US you need your money for the college of your children and for other purposes.
Which you do not in France.
Which we don't know
or in Germany.
In Germany, for example. Yeah?
Yeah.
So you live from your income, that's it. But for the rainy day, rather the welfare state will help you. And this is so you cannot say, okay, in the US they have more private wealth, because you would also take care of public wealth and account it to households.
Right.
Otherwise you get a really strange picture. But it was hard to explain that to the public because they often mix up income and wealth. They take it synonymously.
Right.
They speak about inequality and they mean only income inequality
and not wealth inequality.
And wealth is a term that was not scientifically determined up to now. The OECD came up now with a definition, but we did first the
research
questionnaire and then
the definition.
the definition, which shows, for example, pension wealth. Would you consider it as wealth, yes or no? That is an open issue because in some countries it's a public pension. I cannot take a loan on my public pension. I cannot sell it to you.
But in America it's different.
That's what I meant.
Right.
Also in some European countries it's different. And that makes it hard to compare. So cross-country comparability is very difficult. And if you would have in the US the possibility to compare states, you would also see huge differences. But you do not have this possibility with the SCF, Survey of Consumer Finance of the Fed, because they do not show these divisions of regional subdivisions.
Well, at least in Europe now we're headed in the direction of having the data. If you said that there was a surprise in Germany and in Austria with the highest degree of wealth inequality, where were the lowest degrees of wealth inequality?
Well, again, we have to say that these household surveys have strengths and weaknesses. So where you find the lowest degree of wealth inequality, countries such as Slovakia, they have specifics. After communism, people not comparable to East Germany, they could buy their house. So you have a very high home ownership rate, and so the situation is rather similar. Yeah. But what is interesting that for Germany and Austria we have a rather egalitarian income inequality. That makes this picture a bit harder to explain. You have to bring together the egalitarian world of income to the highly unequal world of wealth. Often people with Sweden miss that point. They say Sweden, that's social democratic tradition, has a it's an egalitarian society, not in the area of wealth. It has a Gini coefficient of almost 0.89%, so it is a very high inequality.
At the wealth level?
on the wealth level, not at the income level. Yeah.
So I think part of what you're trying to do is draw into the public sphere the debate differentiating the income inequality from the wealth inequality.
That's the first step, exactly. Right. Because we cannot do the second step, what is done in income inequality always, to ask the question whether it grows or not. Does it go up from the 80s onwards or not? And maybe you have read the new book of Thomas Piketty, Capital in the 21st Century.
Yes.
He is the first one to bring together these different perspectives on wealth. So in wealth, the discussion is at the beginning. Wealth fulfills, for example, different purposes for different groups of society. It's not always just a resource for bad times, that's for the poor. But for the rich, it is rather status and to make gifts and inheritances. And inheritance is the big issue in this wealth accumulation process, of course. And
because that's what transfers from one generation to the next.
Exactly. And without estate tax, without inheritance taxation, it has to widen this.
So you see in the data, you see a widening of the inequality trend.
I cannot see it, as it is the first wave.
But this is the first wave, but you
we
think...
are doing the second wave at the moment. We will see it there, I assume. Yeah, we should see it. Yeah,
you're working hypothesis
is that we should see that. Yeah.
And so when will that be? How often are you going to?
Every 3 years we publish this service. And I guess for the next generation of young scholars, it will be very helpful.
Exactly.
Because they need longer time series in order to do research. And so it's a starting to do work on.
Great, but we finally have data on something we didn't have data before.
Exactly.
And that's part to us of what new economic thinking is, right? Trying to widen the availability of sources for future scholars to understand our society better.
And it underlines the importance of statistics.
Right.
Because if there are a few super rich missing in the survey data, it doesn't matter for modeling. You can take the wealth variables for your models. But this statistical effort to really cover the whole society, the whole private household sector is very helpful to understand what's going on, this process of wealth accumulation. And I guess we are here standing at the beginning of a process.
So your work at the Austrian Central Bank, which is part of the Euro system, you've been there for 20 years.
No.
Oh no, you haven't.
At the central bank.
At the central bank, yes.
Yes.
But what do you think has changed the most in your period there?
Well, there's a kind of opening. At the time when I started to work at the Austrian Central Bank, it was in the exchange rate rather a follower of the German Bundesbank. And in this sense, this accession to the European Union helped a lot for opening and coming up with new ideas, which links it to INET also, to the new economic thinking. If you make your ideas contestable and if there's a competition among different central banks, how to do things, it helps a lot to improve your work.
And do you see there's a lot of, your research itself was published at the ECB. Yeah. Do you see a lot of collaboration between the national central banks within the Euro system?
Yes, we work together in a network where all the countries participate, economists, statisticians, and this is hard because everybody talks about the advantages of interdisciplinarity and that it would be good to take different perspectives. But in day-to-day work, it's often quite difficult if everybody has his or her ideas and then you discuss. It's too large. The group gets too large. And
it's only getting larger with exactly. More countries wanting to join the Euro.
More countries doing the survey now from Bologna to Hungary.
Okay, and great.
Yes.
So even non-Euro countries
will start then.
Great.
And will follow this approach. And the blueprint was the SCF from the Fed, because from 1983, the Fed, Arthur Kennedy, he was doing this research, which I consider as very valuable. And he's the consultant in our group, and so we have a lot, and it is similar from the questionnaire to the American one.
Okay, Great. So we look forward to seeing the data, and as I
Thank
said,
you
we're going to link it here. Thank you very much for being
Thank
at
you very
INET
much.
and spending some time with us.
Thank you very much.